Izet pointed out that your made-up name parasitosin sounds awfully close to parasitosis. You know, that delusion where you think there's bugs on you? It's oddly appropriate now that I think about it.
So you have all of these peculiarities.
Not anymore. This is going to be the best steak ever.
And if you go through the list of the peculiarities, I think it provides evidence that there's been some kind of distortion. And it's a kind of thing that intellectually we don't know how to process, right?
Sure. I mean, no, but sure. You know, people can't really intellectually process the scale of the universe or quantum mechanics or general relativity or black holes either. Not intuitively, right? Not in accurate detail. We have to resort to mathematics and analogies to understand them at all. But we still know about those things just fine because there's evidence for them. The difference, though, between those things and your thing is that the kind of evidence that they're based on is better than just saying that some people own a knife and a smartphone and expecting people to be impressed.
Because even now, you probably have never thought about it in these terms. You've never thought about, we use gasoline engines, but we have the technology for electric cars.
Yep, I've thought about that plenty. We have gasoline cars that can be pretty cheap because they're established technology, and they have ludicrous range and solid performance, and we can refill them quickly, and the infrastructure for them has been in place for decades. Gas stations, that sort of thing. And we also have electric cars, which are generally more expensive with less range and performance, and they take a pretty long time to charge. And charging stations just aren't that common yet. Despite those issues, I'm actually pretty impressed with the uptake, and it keeps getting better as the technology improves and it gets cheaper. Personally, I don't have one, but I would definitely consider buying one in the future. But I would have to know that it's capable of the long drives between distant prairie cities that I tend to do, and that means either being able to store the energy to go those distances or just being guaranteed a place to charge up along the way. Check back in like 10, maybe 20 years. Probably the market will have sorted it out by then. You know that's a thing, Paris, right? The market? You know that has an impact on what technology people generally use. Just, Can someone please remind me why I'm taking this anywhere near seriously?
We're still using electricity by wire electricity, and people like Tesla 100 years ago had invented wireless electricity.
Well, yeah, and we use that when it's practical, or at least when it's not so impractical that it outweighs the cool factor. You ever see one of those electric toothbrushes with one of those charging stands that you can set it in, but you don't actually have to plug it to anything? Or like one of those cell phone charging pads where you just put your phone on it? Wireless electricity. They're not very efficient, but they're cool. And those things don't use too much power either way, so hey, great, whatever, have your fun. As far as Tesla, though, yeah, sure, he experimented with wireless electricity. Aside from one biographer's account, though, there's no evidence that he ever got further than powering some light bulbs over a short distance through the ground. And as for the whole worldwide wireless Wardenclyffe Tower business, well, that part sounds incredibly dubious to me, but I guess I'll let someone with more expertise dictate if there's any way whatsoever for that to be feasible. I can't see taking all the electricity we generate and sending it into the Earth as being anywhere near as efficient as sending it through power lines directly to where we want it, but hey, what do I know? I don't really care either way, because for the purposes of our discussion, all that really matters is, what would prompt us to switch? The assertion is that if we hadn't been stuck in a time box and regressed back in time, we definitely would have switched, but really why? We already have a very well-established grid of decently efficient, cheap, and reliable power lines that we know how to meter and maintain. If someone really poured all the money into research and development that's necessary to properly test Tesla's idea, and it somehow turned out to work brilliantly, it would still almost certainly come with a whole set of problems of its own that we'd have to work through, just like with anything new. And either way, with or without it, we'd still have to generate the power in the first place, which, frankly, if there's gonna be some kind of electrical revolution, that's where it would be really useful. Forget power transmission. So really, Paris, why would it be necessarily true that we would bother? Sure, it's cool, and I guess it'd be kinda handy to not have to fix power lines when a storm knocks a branch on one, but it seems to me like the only reason you really think it would be necessarily used right now if we hadn't been time warped is just that. It sounds futuristic and cool. Well, that's a bad reason. All that matters in this situation is what's practical, and what we have now is practical, and it works well. So I don't think you're going to get people on board for long-distance wireless power transmission very easily, which would probably explain why people don't really give a shit. Now, within the home, okay, that's kind of cool. If you walk into your house and your stuff just starts charging up, neat, I guess. And if you have a whole bunch of money, apparently Disney's research department came up with a way to do that. You just have to turn all your walls into aluminum plates and put a big-ass copper pipe in the middle of your living room. If you're rich and you really want to uglify your house just because you're too lazy to walk to your desk to plug in your phone, I don't think anyone's going to stop you. Reach for that 23rd century dream, Paris.
We have computers. We have internet. We have the internet. We have like infinite knowledge without wires.
The internet has wires. Lots and lots and lots of wires. And it does not have infinite knowledge, Paris. As a matter of fact, if you did some fringe mathematics and added up each piece of good information as 1 and each piece of misinformation as -1, I bet you'd end up with a number well below 0.
Basically, it's the substitute for God. We don't pray to God, we pray to the internet. We pray to Google. Google, I am having trouble with my ex.
Hello, Paris. This is Google. I am sorry to hear about your ex. Is she stalking you? Don't blame her. You are a total stud.
Google, I have this illness. You don't ask God. We used to ask God. Before it was like, Dear God, my child is sick. Tell me, what should I do?
Gotta be honest with you here, I'm not real confident about either of those ideas. They too often seem to wind up with parents either not doing anything or inappropriately applying maple syrup and bleach to their kids. Maybe try asking a doctor instead. But I guess that'd require actually getting up off your ass and into your obsolete 21st century gas-powered car. Ugh.
Now we go to Google. Dear Google, my child has these symptoms. What might be the disease, dear Google?
Yeah, sure, but you know it's not really Google they're trying to ask, right? What they're hoping is that an actual human being somewhere with medical expertise has already provided the answer. And I guess that's just fine if the kid just has like a runny nose or something. And hell, even if it's misguided for people to search Google instead of visiting a doctor for serious symptoms, at least they go into it expecting a legible answer in a real language, which frankly is more than I can say for prayers to God. So it's an improvement.
And then all of the angels, right? The websites and the experts and the video.
Those aren't angels, Paris. Those are people. You know, humans, other humans, many of whom know things that the person who's doing the search doesn't know. That's kind of how societies have always worked. I don't know if you realize. Like, if you don't know a thing, but you figure that someone else might, you ask someone who you think might know. I'm sorry, but I'm just not seeing the comparison between that and begging to a silent supernatural entity that may or may not exist. People who believe in God still ask other people in their societies for advice, you know. Just because you can present these things like they're analogous doesn't make it a good analogy.
Right? Go to YouTube. Oh, angels and archangels, tell me how to fix my tire on my car. The angels come down. This is how you fix a car. This is the fastest way to fix a car tire. And fix a car tire in 5 minutes. Archangel.
Okay, well, I got a challenge for you. Try asking God to tell you how to fix something if you don't already know. It doesn't matter how much you pray, it's not going to happen. Do you know why it works so much more reliably when you go to YouTube? Well, it's because YouTube is not populated by angels, it's populated by humans. Real ones, who exist and can speak, or at least type, and who've already learned how to fix car tires and fix whatever, and then they tell people how to do it. And you can go and seek their advice, just like people have been doing for the entirety of human history. It's like you honestly think that in the old days, people were dumb enough that instead of asking the village blacksmith how they could fix their sword, people just prayed for God to mail them an instruction manual. Yeah, no, people are not that dumb. At least none of the ones whose swords got fixed.
We haven't progressed our understanding of things because we have been repressed. We have been regressed. And when you regress the flow of time, you get these distortions. You get the psychological distortions, you get these illusions, you get this old programming.
And when you don't regress time, you get people using technology that works well enough for them for easily understood reasons. Oh, but I'm sure that's just my mental distortion talking.
Old program such that when I say, you know, if I were to suggest to a devout worshiper of any religion that the internet is a better is probably your God because you're using the internet to ask questions and you're praying and you're learning. They say, so no, I still need my religion.
Paris, I'm a hardcore atheist from the 23rd century, and I agree with them. The internet is not their God. God and the internet play very, very different roles in the lives of the religious. Sure, some people actually try to use God as a source of medical and mechanical information, but somehow I don't think those people give much of a damn at all what the internet has to say.
So the child has been in the closet for 2,000 years, right? And we've been slowly regressed. Our ancestors, our forebearers, and now we carry that corruption. We carry that dislocation of data. We carry these peculiarities.
This is starting to sound uncomfortably close to original sin. But yeah, Paris, I heard you the first few times. Can we...
My thinking is we are actually living in the 23rd century.
Yeah, I know. That's why I've had my steak in the microwave this whole time. I've already heard this one, Paris. Could we maybe...
And I have evidence. There's a computer, there's the internet, there's a smartphone, there's a space shuttles. There's this evidence. There's the fact that there's atheists. Atheists are from the 23rd century. They've been in the 23rd century. There's no God.
I know! God damn it, Paris! I know, okay? I know. You've said all of this before. Could you... Wait. What if you're actually saying all this for the first time, and we're just in the middle of a time jump? My God, it's all real.
I can live a happy life. Right? That's my evidence.
Never mind. That's a new one.
People always say, where's your evidence? Where's the scientific calculation? Where's the official stamp?
Well, some calculations would be appreciated, like I explained in my last video. You said you were doing mathematics, but you didn't show any of it. But no, that's not the main issue here. The main issue is, first, is your hypothesis coherent? No. And then, is it the most efficient explanation for the given data? Definitely no. Now that's not to say it's entirely unworthy of consideration, but let's consider it after we at least know that time box technology is even possible, okay? You gotta understand, what you're proposing here is kinda far out there. It's pretty far away from how the world appears to work. So if all the evidence you come with is, hey look, knives and smartphones exist at the same time and we're not using wireless electricity much yet, that's not good enough, okay? People aren't rejecting your ideas because there's no official stamp on them. They're rejecting your ideas because your reasoning is dog shit, and everything you bring up is far more simply explained in other ways. You're not going to get anywhere just talking about why your idea is an idea. You have to tell people why it's the best idea, why it explains the data the best. That's why people ask you for further evidence and scientific calculations.
The evidence is there's a smartphone in your pocket.
Yes, a smartphone, a device with an exceedingly well-documented history in living memory. These things didn't just pop out of the air fresh out of the 23rd century, Paris. The development and miniaturization of phone and computing technology took a lot of time, money, trial and error, and gradual steps. Surely you know this. I mean, you're like 50, dude. Later in the video, you talk about how much you like the 80s. Well, do you remember those old brick cell phones? Do you remember PDAs? Do you remember those weak, clunky desktop PCs and laptops? Do you remember what smartphones used to be like before the iPhone? Throughout your entire life, technology has been getting more compact and more powerful because it became more popular with consumers and the industry grew and more money was poured into R&D, and you're just ignoring it and saying, no, it came from Star Trek. If modern smartphones, if like the iPhone X or whatever, just showed up in stores one day in the year 1800 after zero history of development, yeah, okay, maybe we would at least entertain the idea that they came from some baffling science fiction kind of source. But that's not what happened. They're just one more relatively unsurprising outcome of a recent history of technological development that all of us grew up witnessing. You know, a lot of the time I find debunking creationists kind of sad and depressing, but this is even worse. Sure, young Earth creationists deny biological evolution, but they didn't personally witness biological evolution. That's something that takes place over a huge period of time, and it's very hard to see it actually happening. So at least there's some kind of excuse. And at least they understand that modern technology was developed by people over time. It's at least better. But look, Paris, this is starting to get a little bit repetitive, to say the least. I think people get the point by now. I know I do. So I'm going to start editing your points down to try to help you get them across a little more, efficiently. Okay?
I'm making a video. I'm making a holographic projection on a tiny device and I'm uploading it on into space, into heaven, and you are watching it in the present. That is evident. That is called hard evidence.
You know, thanks to science, humans have made some really useful discoveries in the last couple centuries and managed to make them profitable. We know the names of the people who did the work. We know the thought processes, we know the reasoning behind their discoveries, we know the governments and companies that were involved in demanding and funding the research, we know how each technology followed from the last, we know the individual pieces of technology that directly preceded the smartphone. Take a stroll through any computer museum and the gradual improvement is easy to see. I don't remotely see how, with all of this evidence of how things actually happened, you could reasonably take this as evidence of anything but human ingenuity. Especially not when your alternative suggestion is as wildly complicated and improbable, and not to mention incoherent, as your idea that technology to trap entire civilizations in time boxes was built and used by a secret conspiratorial group long before the development of said computer technology, and apparently with the purpose of just giving them 10% extra time to develop said technology. It's evidence of that in the same way that the geologic column is evidence of Noah's flood, which is to say, it's not. And to me it becomes somehow even less convincing when you consider why it's your opinion that the evidence must imply artificial regression of time, but not artificial progression of time. Your idea is that only the technology that you deem appropriate to the time should exist at the time, and thus, since you deem smartphones to be 23rd century technology, we must live in the 23rd century but have been regressed to the 21st by malevolent controllers. Well, in that case, the use of fire that you keep mentioning could just as well be evidence that we live in 1,000,000 years BCE, and some benevolent entity, maybe even some really insightful human who wanted to help his species, progressed us to the 21st century. Maybe all of this technology is the result of us being pushed ahead, and really we're just cavemen who should only know how to make fire. If old and new technology coexisting implies time bending, then that still doesn't demonstrate which way time was bent. So why the leap to assuming a malevolent motive? What's wrong with benevolent ones? Are conspiracy theories just not as fun if there's no bad guy?
And I have an issue with people asking me for hard evidence of stuff, because I give you hard evidence. You cook with fire and you use a smartphone. These two should not coexist.
You keep on saying that, but actually you haven't even stopped to explain even briefly why they shouldn't. And I explained more than I really needed to why they should. And once again, we find you using a creationist argument. The coexistence of fire and smartphones is evidence against technological evolution and 4 time boxes in the exact same way that the coexistence of coelacanths and salmon is evidence against biological evolution and 4 young Earth creationism. Which is to say, I can't take it anymore! Please help! Can't you hear me?
But they do, Paris, they do. Because your brain cannot repair the damage that was done to the timeline. The damage was done to the timeline.
Paris, there's a huge difference between the sentence, they do, and the sentence, they do for good reason. But of course, even if there was no good reason, that's still no good reason to leap to the most physically improbable conspiracy theory ever invented. This is not a dichotomy, Paris. There are a lot more options than just, there's a good reason why we use both old and new tech, and evil sci-fi dudes attacked time.
There were, I think, over the centuries, key dates where the timeline was severely damaged. So one particular date, I want to add, one particular date is 1985. So if people remember, the 80s looked very promising, looked very positive, looked very inspirational. The 80s were great. And then something happened. I think in 1985, there was an attack on the timeline, a serious attack. And that caused a major shift. And that was because whoever did it wanted to control the planet. And to control the planet, you damage the timeline, you shift everything. And that probably led us, to some of the tragedies and the wars and the catastrophes that we've experienced.
Well, okay, that's one idea, but I might have a better one. You see, according to your website, you started doing this stuff after you were visited by 3 interdimensional elves at age 38. Pretty typical. And then you continued on for 10 years. And note that this page says copyright 2016. This page from your other website says that you've been doing this since 2005, and it says that you did it for 11 years. So from that I can reliably assume that you're somewhere around 50. So you were born somewhere around 1967, which means in 1985 you'd have been somewhere around 18. Do you know what happens around that age to a lot of people? Their innocent childlike view of the world melts away thanks to experience and, frankly, puberty, and they turn into adults. They learn about the darker side of life and history and current events. They also leave high school and get thrust out into the big wide world. That general age range is when a lot of people start to see the world in a much worse light than they used to. The same thing happened to me around that age, and emotionally I feel like the world was a lot nicer before then and turned way shittier afterwards. And I'm like 20 years younger than you, so that change in the world was not even close to 1985 for me. And you didn't mention some sort of big attack on the timeline in like 2004. I think most people recognize that this is a pretty obvious side effect of just not being a kid anymore, but for some reason some people actually believe the illusion that the world really was all sunshine and rainbows until they started to grow up and notice that it wasn't. But sure, Paris, maybe the world really was just so much better until the timeline was attacked just as you happened to be entering adulthood. And all those tragedies and conflicts and catastrophes around the globe in the early 80s and every decade before then are just master controller lies. Yeah, that's way more likely.
In recent years, in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of updates and repairs. So we're coming back. There's been a lot of technical work on the timeline. And we're seeing this in the field, right? New discoveries, new sciences, new thinking, the awakening. All of this is because the timeline is being repaired.
Or because we've been making new discoveries constantly ever since we as a civilization discovered the value of science. The last 5 or 6 years, Paris, really? What seems so special about that time range to you? Smartphones got a little bit better? Wow, what a dramatic shift. But Paris, you should be careful. Remember, there's just as much reason to think that we live in 1 million BCE as we do in 2300 CE. So if the timeline engineers manage to fix the timeline, okay, we might stand to gain 200 years of technological advancement, but we also might go back to the Stone Age. You have to consider these dangers, Paris.
I talk a lot about karma because it's very important.
Karma, of course. I wonder what other kinds of woo are floating around beneath the surface here. Well, since you just kind of bring it up out of the blue and don't really say much interesting about it, I'm just going to leave it.
And, while we call it mental illness and depression and new diseases, maybe it's just the timeline is being put together again. And our consciousness, our minds, is not be able to understand it.
Uh-huh. Okay, maybe. That's an option. Another option is maybe human brains are just kind of complicated and messy and easily put off balance by a giant list of known and identifiable factors. Or, whatever. Yeah, maybe brains work perfectly all the time except when the time bandits attack. Perfect. That's just as parsimonious. Fine.
And we don't have the science for the time. There's no timeline science, right?
There is, actually. That's part of physics.
So we don't understand it. We just look at it from, I'm sick, I don't feel well. Here's my smartphone. And we call it diseases and illnesses and strange things, but maybe it's something else.
Oh, I get it. So it's not so much that we have no time scientists, it's more that we have no time doctors. Oh, you have a headache? Oh my. Go see your time doctor. He'll warp you to 2019. You'll feel much better. Oh gee, you have schizophrenia. You keep on seeing interdimensional elves? That's pretty serious. That might take a little more time healing. Take this giant pill and I'll see you in 2130.
I think when we understand that we are in the 23rd century, when we change our calendars is when we've repaired. And that could take years, right? Many years.
Yeah, in fact, I know it sounds crazy, and maybe this is kind of an out there suggestion, so bear with me, but I think it could be almost 200 years before we have calendars that say we're in the 23rd century.
And that maybe we won't cook with fire anymore. Maybe we won't have hunting knives. Maybe we won't be wiping our ass in the future.
Okay, that time it was definitely a laugh. So, you are fucking with me, right? Yeah, right? I don't know. Alright, well, thanks to everybody for watching. If If you like the video, give it a like and subscribe, and if you really like my channel, you can join all these fine people that you see on the screen in supporting me on Patreon. Or you can set up a monthly donation on PayPal, or contribute once on PayPal, or whatever floats your boat. I like it when your boat floats. Do what makes you feel good. And everyone who helps out, whether they're on this list or not, is very much appreciated. Anyway, I'll see you next time with something different, but this video gave me a headache. It's pretty clear that my brain just can't accept the true nature of the timeline, so I'd better go see Doctor Who for a prescription. But before I do that, I'd better go grab my steak out of the microwave. It's been in there for a while. Oh yeah, come to Papa. Yeah! Oh fuck!